Je voudrais du soleil vert, des dentelles et des théières, des photos de bord de mer, dans mon jardin d'hiver. Je voudrais de la lumière, comme en Nouvelle-Angleterre. Je veux changer d'atmosphère, dans mon jardin d'hiver. Ma robe à fleurs, sous la pluie de novembre, tes mains qui courent, je n'en peux plus de t'attendre. Les années passent, qu'il est loin, là je tombe. Nul ne peut nous entendre. Je voudrais du Fred Astaire.
New developments today in the impeachment inquiry into President Trump. Just moments ago, we reported that next week, House Democrats will depose acting U.S. Ambassador to Ukraine, Bill Taylor. And at this very moment on Capitol Hill, the former senior advisor to Secretary of State Mike Pompeo is giving his deposition to lawmakers. Michael McKinley, he is testifying today not under subpoena. He resigned from the State Department last week. Think about that. Joining me now on Capitol Hill, MSNBC's Garrett Haake and former federal prosecutor Cynthia Oxney. Garrett, first, what do we know about what McKinley might say regarding his time in the State Department? And give us a little bit more context around who this guy is, what his job was, and who he was working for.
Sure. I mean, McKinley spent 37 years at the State Department. He served as an ambassador at a number of different countries and was brought in by Mike Pompeo to essentially serve as Pompeo's conduit to the political staff and to others at the State Department until he resigned last Friday. Now, one of the things that House investigators, Democrats, want to get out of McKinley is the circumstances around the firing of Marie Yovanovitch. We do have some reporting to suggest that that was one of the last straws for McKinley at his time at the State Department. What does he know about how Pompeo handled that and how this ties into the, Giuliani outside advisor nexus of what was going on in Ukraine? He is a context witness for Democrats in that regard. And frankly, with the State Department operations more broadly, something that Democrats have been very interested in getting more information on since the moment we found out about this original phone call between the president and the president of Ukraine.
Cynthia, we know a number of people close to the president, whether it's Rudy Giuliani, the documents that the House is asking for from Mike Pence's office, Mick Mulvaney and others are refusing to comply. We just learned today Mark Esper is refusing to comply. Is this a different situation than we saw, let's say, in the Russia investigation or the request for the president's taxes, where those stonewalling tactics and running the clock worked because there was no other information getting out? Right now, you've got McKinley testifying. 3 other people have already testified, and there's more coming. If you're any of these people refusing to comply, isn't it a negative for you not to be able to tell your story and to allow others to do it for you?
Absolutely. And you're right. The stonewalling worked in the Russia investigation because they never broke through. But here, all the career people are coming through. This Bill Taylor is very important next week. Sondland's testimony is very important. It'll be interesting to see whether or not he brings the documents that have been subpoenaed. And we found out now from Fiona Hill that he was using his personal phone. So it'll be interesting to know whether or not we learn about the text messages that are on that phone and any other information that he has. Was he using WhatsApp? What was he doing to communicate? But yes, you're absolutely right. It's different from the Russia investigation because the stonewalling has been stopped. And the other thing in the Russia investigation is nobody ever pushed it. Don McGahn didn't testify, and the House Judiciary took him about 3 months to go to court and say it's an emergency, he needs to testify. And of course, the court's like, emergency? Where were you 3 months ago? It was such an emergency. This will probably be very different. When these people aren't testifying, Schiff will be in very soon in front of a court and pushing to get this information from the individuals who aren't showing up. And it will be an emergency situation because it'll be done quickly. And it is an impeachment investigation, which gives it gives the court added ammunition to force them to testify more quickly and turn over documents.
Cynthia, The Republicans or the White House has been trying to force Nancy Pelosi to have an official impeachment vote. Without that vote, they're saying this is not an official investigation. It's a big scam. They don't have to do it. Let's say Nancy Pelosi puts this to a vote. Let's say she gets it. Will they have any other viable excuse to not show up?
Of course they will. It's Lucy, not to date myself, but this is Lucy in the football. I mean, I'm tempted on some level to say, yes, just have it so that they don't have that excuse anymore. But let's face it, they are not going to cooperate. That letter from the White House, which was not the least bit lawyerly and had improper citations to law in it, when the White House said we are not cooperating in any way, shape, or form, that's their attitude. They are not going to turn it over. I have to say I have a great respect for the toughness that Nancy Pelosi has in this situation. I don't think they're ever going to do it. They're going to have to be forced by a court.
Garrett, what have we learned so far about White House Chief of Staff Mick Mulvaney's role concerning Ukraine policy? His name keeps being bantered about, but has it been pinned to anything specific yet?
Well, he's the chief of staff or the acting chief of staff, so you would expect Mulvaney to have his hands at least a little bit on almost everything going on within the White House, and that appears to be the case here. We learned yesterday from one of the members who was in that deposition that there was a meeting that Mulvaney called back in May in which he essentially directed 3 political appointees to be in charge of Ukraine policy, forgetting what their actual jobs or responsibilities should be. Those 3 individuals, Rick Perry, Kurt Volker, who we have already heard from, and Gordon Sondland, a name we're all going to be very familiar with, I suspect, when this whole thing is said and done. He's expected to be here tomorrow, and we'll have to talk a little bit more about this. But Mulvaney is increasingly coming into focus as a presence for all of this. And he's someone who I think will likely go to great lengths to be protected by the White House should he ever be called to testify or provide any kind of documents. But his presence in all of this can't be overstated at this point.
And let's not forget, there was a surprise visitor today back on the Hill, Kurt Volker, for a second time in less than a week.
It is Thursday, the 17th of October of 2019, and you are in West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. I am your chef de cuisine, Justice Putnam, and our daily special is Metro's Shrimp and Grits Thursdays. A little bit of jambalaya, a little bit of spice in your life. Well, we begin this morning with some very, very, very sad news. A giant has passed. May he rest in peace. Elijah Cummings, as you have heard, passed away this morning at age 68 from long-standing or long-term health complications. It's hard not to put a tinfoil hat on. It really is. I'm thinking just earlier this month or the middle of last month, it wasn't very long ago, his domicile, his house was broken into. Yeah, maybe just a coincidence, maybe. I remember Trump making a joke about it, which caused my, the proverbial red flags to raise. As if it was a convenient break-in. And when I think of all of Vlad and his critics and the convenient deaths that they all suffered, heart attacks, fatal muggings, fatal polonium poisoning, fatal 5-story fall from a condo moving a piano, and you don't own a piano or live in a condo. All of those convenient deaths were so very convenient. And Elijah Cummings, being the chair of the House Oversight Committee, who is deposing witnesses as we speak, has conveniently passed. Well, it can be by design or it can be just, coincidence too. Regardless, it is very convenient. I don't think it's going to stop the wheels of justice. No, not at all. Democracy doesn't just stop. We have more members of the team, of course. So that is very sad news to have to contemplate the beginning of the day. But also October 17th is another day that's firmly embedded in my memory card, and because I was living in San Francisco when the Loma Prieta quake hit. I was living on Russian Hill, right there at Green and Vallejo. Yeah, great place. I love that place. And I was working at Fridays then and getting ready to go to work. Had to work the night shift, yeah. And had the television on watching the World Series, Oakland A's, San Francisco Giants. We called it the Bay Series. Baseball. Yeah, we liked our baseball. And then suddenly it started happening. And I've been through a few earthquakes. I was 15 when the Sylmar quake hit back in the 70s, early 70s. That was probably the first real quake that impressed me, shall we say. This one was decidedly different. Being on Russian Hill, that's granite. That's pretty strong. I had my grad work. I was working on my master's at State for in literature, and my project was on floppies at a friend's house because that's where I was doing my work on their computer. Learn my lesson. Yep, had to start that project all over because it just happened to be at 6 Cervantes, which was one of the buildings in the marina that collapsed and burned. After that, I made sure that I had hard copies, an actual paper manuscript, floppies, or whatever, I had, sent to various parts of the country where I had relatives. I figured it's going to have to be a pretty damn big asteroid to take it all out. Yeah, reconstructing that project was not fun. Damn. And I didn't have any real backups. Live and learn. Live and learn. But that wasn't the end of it. I mean, I didn't even know that I had lost my grad project at that point. I wasn't even thinking about it. I walked to the wharf. That's where Fridays was. I helped open that store, by the way, and now it's closed. Right next door, across the street from the Buena Vista, just so you know. And, of course, no power whatsoever. I checked in because, it was my shift. And they had, of course, a real skeleton crew. I think the manager, the AGM, and a couple of bartenders were going to just take care of stuff. And they did. So they sent the rest of us home to take care of, our places. So, I almost got killed by my books. One room has always been dedicated for my library, and I have bookcases from floor to ceiling on every bit of wall space one can imagine. And up to that point, I wasn't bracketing my bookcases up, and I don't know why. But I learned my lesson. Those bookcases started toppling, and I'm not talking, nice little paperbacks. I'm talking about very heavy hardbounds. And I'm thinking this would be great. I'm going to get killed by my books. So I stepped out of that room real quick, and I thought that building was going to fall down. And I was in one of the bay windows, the bay window in the living room area, which faced out on Green Street. And the way the building was moving, I thought it was going to topple out over across the street. And I was prepared to ride that building down, jump out that window, roll so that the top of the building doesn't hit me, and somehow survive. You think about all that you're going to have to do. And it happens in a very short amount of time. Really, everything's condensed. And just about the time I thought that building was going to go, the earthquake started lessening. Oh, boy. So, one of the great aspects of that event, though, was the humanity of everybody. Not just in that neighborhood, but all over the city. Oh, yeah, there were a few merchants who wanted to gouge people on water and batteries and things like that, but that got shut down pretty quick. What I liked was just regular citizens, directing traffic, because there's a lot of traffic in San Francisco, and it can get confusing, especially if you're a tourist. And October still has a lot of tourists. I got to tell you, I don't know. I work the wharf. So, quite a momentous event. Learned a lot about earthquakes and took a lot of mitigating factors after that. I got to say, we had a lot of earthquake retrofitting jobs after that one. Yeah. That's right. Bolt it down, folks. Bolt it down. All right. Well, let's get on with the rest of the menu here in the Bistro Cafe of West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. At the top, lawmakers heard testimony from Pompeo's former senior advisor, but many top-level Trump officials are refusing to comply with the impeachment inquiry. Of course they are. But I think a dam is broken. And Nancy's point down on Trump yesterday. Oh, Trump thought that was going to be, deranged, Nancy. She's all deranged. Yikes. And I think that a turning point has been, a tipping point. God, I hate Gladwell as an aside. Just remember, the tipping point with Malcolm Gladwell has always been Malcolm Gladwell. Well, back to the tipping point of Trump. I think we've reached a tipping point now. Just to mention that photograph, that official presidential photograph. You see the generals hanging their head in shame. Now, they can be feeling shame on many different fronts. No pun intended. Yet, I thought that was as much of a powerful image as Nancy pointing down, the mobster. Because the shame I saw was that they have to be loyal, but this guy is not really, shall we say, presidential timber. Not at all. And what has happened in the Middle East on his watch is, I hate to consider this, but it is probably irreparable. We got Pence over there trying to get Erdogan to come to heel. Yeah, right. We treated our allies with such disdain and disrespect. Now a NATO ally is totally disrespecting the United States. I am not happy about this. That is the Vice President of the United States of America, and he is being disrespected. I don't care if it's Pence. That administration has no one to blame but themselves, and we all know it. So we got that going for us, which is not really that nice. On the rest of the menu here in the Bistro Cafe, hate groups are abusing the tax code to fund their dangerous activities. Really? I told you so. Taking a cue from the Trump White House, Uber and Lyft refused to appear before the House Transportation and Infrastructure Committee inquiry. Really? I guess you can just turn it down. I guess. But it speaks volumes about where they are at. And the United Auto Workers win major gains for workers in a tentative deal with GM to end the month-long strike. After the break, we move to the chef's table where the Australian Intelligence Agency wants more resources to counter foreign interference in their elections. And Amnesty International urged Hong Kong to investigate a bloody attack on the leader of one of the biggest pro-democracy groups there. All that and more. On West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy, bon appetit. bottom of our homepage at netrootsradio.com. To the rightish of the page is, of course, the chat room link monitored by Kelly Lincoln. Thank you, Kelly. To the leftish of the page from the chat room link at the bottom of our homepage at netrootsradio.com is, of course, our link to our Patreon site. And do please become a recurring Patreon of Netroots Radio. Though the bulk of what we finance this endeavor of resistance comes out of our own pockets, we are unable to do it without you. And thank you for your generosity. We've been doing this for 8 years because of your generosity, and we thank you very much for allowing us to fulfill our civic duty as the founders originally intended, all those many decades and decades and decades ago. If you would like to follow Netroots Radio on Twitter, you can do so simply by going to @Netroots Radio, and that is taken care of by Tom. Thank you, Tom. Follow me on Twitter at Justice Putnam, and I post the show notes and links diary on Daily Codes about 10 minutes before showtime, so do check that out, because that's where the unembellished part of the news is, truly. You can follow the show on Twitter at Cookbook West, and most importantly, pick up podcasts by way of Spreaker, Stitcher, TuneIn, iHeart, YouTube, iTunes, really wherever podcasts can be found. All right, we better jump right into these first offerings here. You know, I'm still torn up about Elijah Cummings passing. Let's just, put aside, my tinfoil hat meanderings. I'm just really torn up. Not because of the political aspects, but Elijah Cummings is a giant. Oh, and of course, I got to tell you, the racist trolls are out in force. They can't tell the difference between John Lewis and Elijah Cummings. Crazy. Well, of course, they are able to tell the difference between the blonde talent on Fox. I wonder why that is. Well, like I intimated before, we better jump right into this first offering here in the Bistro Cafe of West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy, and it comes out of Talking Points memo by Jason M. Blazicus and Connor Freeman. I'm sorry, I just destroyed that fellow's name. I apologize. The cacophony of radical right-wing violence that reverberated within the communities of Charlottesville, El Paso, and Pittsburgh recently resulted in a long-overdue decision by the DHS to treat white supremacy as a domestic terrorism threat itself. While DHS's rhetorical shift is useful, it is now time for the government and the private sector to counter the finances that help fuel white supremacist violence. The radical right in the United States uses both legal and illicit ways to secure funding for its recruitment, propaganda, and operational efforts. As a white supremacy extremism report by the Sufin Center makes clear, in particular, these groups have a long history of avoiding taxes. In the mid-'70s, the IRS assembled a special team of agents to counter the tax evasion tactics of groups like Posse Comitatus, a sovereign citizen group, as former Chicago Tribune journalist James Coates wrote in his book, Armed and Dangerous. Illegal acts of tax evasion certainly remain a tactic of the radical right, but groups also use a pernicious and legally available method, claiming a tax exemption based on tenuous claims of charitable or educational work. Well, we can put the charitable part aside and just agree amongst ourselves that it is very educational. They'll beat you over the head until you learn it. By cross-referencing the Southern Poverty Law Center's list of radical right hate groups with the IRS list of tax-exempt organizations, we found that 19 hate groups have at one time received tax exemptions for 501c3 or 501c4 nonprofit groups. Of those 19 groups, 5 have maintained their exemption or had it reinstated after a brief revocation. It seems pretty clear that hate groups should not be receiving these exemptions. According to IRS guidelines, to qualify for an exemption under the 501c3 of the IRS Internal Revenue Code, groups must be, quote, charitable, religious, or educational in nature. The IRS's definition of charitable includes a line that groups should eliminate prejudice and discrimination and defending human and civil rights secured by law. Well, I'm already in arguments with a bunch of Ron Paul, Lyndon LaRouche types who say, that is so discriminatory against the haters. I'm serious. They don't say it like that, but that's exactly what they mean. Federal action to revoke these special tax-exempt benefits is not impossible. Bob Jones University, a small university in South Carolina, had its tax status revoked because its admission policies were racially biased. In ruling on the case in 1983, Supreme Court Justice Warren Burger explained that the Bob Jones discriminatory policies were not consistent with IRS charity-related definitions. And I got to tell you, that was Burger. The Burger Court was not a liberal institution by any means. Not only did the court revoke Bob Jones' tax-exempt status, the court also ordered that the university pay back taxes to the tune of almost $500,000. The IRS also made decisions itself to revoke tax exemption status for a number of sovereign citizen groups that secured 501c3 status. Examples include the American Border Patrol Organization, a civilian border patrol organization that gained infamy for its tactics of stalking perceived border invaders near the U.S.-Mexico border and maintaining a website that endorses anti-Mexican sentiment, as well as the Oath Keepers, a radical anti-government movement ostensibly made up of former military and law enforcement officers that uses hateful rhetoric and disseminates unfounded conspiracies. Well, I would take issue with former. We have Oath Keeper sheriffs in this state of Oregon right now, elected to their office in a county-wide capacity, because that's the only people who have the constitutional ability to determine the laws of the United States. That's a conspiracy theory I'd like to squash right now. In addition to the legal setbacks, the IRS's bandwidth for implementing tax exemption-related oversight has been degraded to a combination of budget cuts and an influx of tax-exempt applications. An aversion to legal risk and a dearth of resources are a recipe for federal inaction, the results of which may provide radical right groups the ability to augment their financial power by leveraging tax breaks. In April of this year, the Make of America took an important step in shutting down all accounts associated with several of these hate groups. Despite the lack of resources, the IRS has a responsibility to investigate charities, churches, and schools that openly end-run tax exemption guidelines. The government's action against Bob Jones University forced the school to change its admission policies, and later, in 2014, the university regained its tax-exempt status. And just as the U.S. government has the leverage to alter behavior, non-government entities have similar power. Financial institutions should take a page out of Bank of America's playbook and stop doing business with organizations that openly encourage murder, even if they claim that it's just religious. David Shepardson of Reuters brings us this next offering here in the Bistro Cafe of West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. Metro Shrimp and Grits Thursdays. A little bit of jambalaya, a little bit of spice in your life. Uber Technologies and Lyft declined to appear yesterday, Wednesday, at a U.S. House of Representatives hearing on issues relating to the ride-hailing industry, a congressional committee said. The two ride-hailing companies have been asked to appear as part of a House Transportation and Infrastructure Committee inquiry on safety and labor practices as lawmakers seek to prepare legislation that will impact the industry. Their failure to appear at this hearing is a telling sign that they would rather suffer a public lashing than answer questions on the record about their operations. U.S. Representative Peter DeFazio, who is the chair of the panel, said in his prepared remarks. DeFazio added that the hearing should also serve as a wake-up call to the companies that have flooded our roadways with disruptive technologies and investor capital, that their days of operating with little public policy and regulatory oversight in the transportation space are coming to an end. He raised a number of issues, from safety to congestion to wages of drivers. Earlier this week, he urged the company's chief executives in a letter to participate in the inquiry, even as Uber and Lyft directed lawmakers to third-party industry associations. DeFazio added, the tenuous existence of Uber and Lyft is literally fueled by millions of independent contractors who see their take-home pay reduced drastically below minimum wage in some states, as they are made to pay fees collected by the company, self-employment taxes, and costs associated with operating and maintaining their vehicles. He said, the companies which have reported substantial losses don't make information about their process for deactivating dangerous drivers public. They don't share data on the prevalence of assaults on their platforms. They don't reveal details on how drivers are paid. What we do know is that both these companies are struggling since going public. Clearly, this business model is not sustainable. Anonymous worker bees at the Associated Press bring us this final offering here in the Bistro Cafe of West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. Bargainers for General Motors and the United Auto Workers reached a tentative contract deal on Wednesday yesterday that could end a month-long strike that brought down the company's U.S. factories to a standstill. The deal, which the union says offers major gains for workers, was hammered out after months of bargaining, but will not bring an immediate end to the strike by 49,000 hourly workers. They will likely stay on the picket lines for at least 2 more days as 2 union committees vote on the deal, after which the members will have to approve. Terms of the tentative 4-year contract were not released, but it is likely to include some pay raises, lump sum payments to workers, and requires that GM build new vehicles in U.S. factories. Well, let's get to our break, and when we get back from that break, we are going to go through weather from around the world and finish up with the stories that we have curated for you today. You are listening to West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy, and we will be right back.
You are listening to netrootsradio.com.
Please hang up and try again.
from a point at sea to the circles of your mind. A new force is at work for planetary transformation. New radio for a new Earth.
This is Scientific American's 60-Second Science. I'm Suzanne Bard. Tardigrades are some of nature's toughest animals. Also known as water bears, the tiny creatures can withstand extreme conditions, like boiling hot temperatures, long periods of dehydration, and even oxygen deprivation.
One of the really cool things about tardigrades is that you can shoot them in outer space and they can survive the vacuum and radiation of low Earth orbit.
University of California San Diego biochemist Jim Kadonaga. Of course, he says tardigrades didn't evolve to endure the perils of space travel.
Many tardigrades live in environments that are both wet and dry, like moss. And when it's wet, they're active, and when it's dry, they can go into a desiccated state. That's something like a state of suspended animation.
Normally, dehydration would make tardigrade DNA susceptible to damage from chemicals called hydroxyl radicals, which form when water molecules split. They also form when DNA is exposed to radiation. But Kadonaga suspected that a protein found only in tardigrades, called DSEP, might protect their DNA under both conditions. DSEP stands for damage suppressor protein.
And the remarkable thing about this DSEP protein is that when you put it into human cells in the laboratory, it makes those cells more resistant to X-ray radiation.
Kadonaga's team, led by then undergraduate student Carolina Chavez, studied how DSEP protects DNA in cells. They found that it binds to chromatin, the compact structure that allows long molecules of DNA to ball up and fit into a tiny cell. The researchers think DSEP acts as a sort of chromatin insulator, shielding DNA from attack by hydroxyl radicals. They conclude that the protein is likely the key to the tardigrade's extreme hardiness in conditions that would prove lethal to most other organisms. The study appears in the journal eLife. Kadonaga says understanding the tardigrade's secret weapon may also inform biotechnology and pharmaceutical research.
And so now that we know how DSEP works, we might be able to use that knowledge to make designer versions of DSEP that can be used to potentially make cells more durable or longer lived.
Thanks for listening. For Scientific American's 60-Second Science, I'm Suzanne Bard.
This is a message from CDC.
After hurricanes, tornadoes, and floods, standing water and excess moisture help mold grow in your home, garage, and other structures. When you return to a home that has been flooded, know that you're likely to have mold. Mold puts your family's health at risk. If you have mold growing in your home, you should clean it up and fix other water problems, such as leaks in roofs, walls, or plumbing. Keep your children and pets out of affected areas until you've cleaned. Control moisture in your home to prevent mold growth. To remove mold growth from hard surfaces, use commercial products, soap and water, or a bleach solution of no more than 1 cup of household laundry bleach in 1 gallon of water. Follow the manufacturer's instructions. Never mix bleach with ammonia or other household cleaners. It will produce dangerous, toxic fumes. Open windows and doors to provide fresh air.
For more information, visit cdc.gov or call 1-800-CDC-INFO.
This program is presented by the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention.
For an expectant mother, taking care of her developing baby means taking good care of herself. One way she can do this is by ensuring she gets vaccinated. If a woman is or might be pregnant during flu season, it's especially important to get her annual flu shot, preferably before the end of October. In addition, women should be vaccinated against whooping cough during the 3rd trimester of each pregnancy. Failure to get vaccinated places both mother and baby at increased risk for serious complications of these infections, including hospitalization and even death. If you're pregnant or planning to get pregnant, ask your healthcare provider when you should get your vaccines. Thank you for joining us on A Minute of Health with CDC.
For the most accurate health information, visit cdc.gov or call 1-800-CDC-INFO.
Hi, it's Tom. Could we humbly suggest your donation to netrootsradio.com. All we've got to run this 24-hour powerhouse of progressive resistance radio is what comes out of our own wallets. And you are our biggest donor. And it doesn't take much, $3, $5. Just go to the bottom of our netrootsradio.com page and hit our secure donate button. Heck, you can even make a recurring contribution, and you'll get a wondiferous pair of Netroots radio stickers for application to your backpack, your bumper sticker, or your banjo. Well, it's up to you which backpack you want to put it on. So donate what you'd like at the bottom of our netrootsradio.com's homepage, because you are our biggest donor. netrootsradio.com. Together, we are Resistance Radio.
This program is presented by the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention.
Heart disease and stroke can be catastrophic. They're leading causes of death, disability, and healthcare spending in the U.S., yet they're largely preventable. Alarmingly, heart disease and stroke are taking a toll on middle-aged adults 35 to 64, with over 800,000 deaths and hospitalizations in 2016. Million Hearts is a national initiative focused on preventing 1 million heart attacks, strokes, and other cardiovascular events by 2022. Coordinated actions by Million Hearts partners in communities, healthcare, and public health will keep people healthy, optimize care, and improve outcomes in populations at risk. Everyone has a part to play. Focus on the ABCs of heart health. A. Aspirin use when appropriate. B. Blood pressure control. C. Cholesterol management. And S. Smoking cessation. To learn more, visit cdc.gov/vital signs.
For the most accurate health information, visit cdc.gov or call 1-800-CDC-INFO.
I'm Rick Smith, and this is Labor History in 2. On this day in labor history, the year was 1877. That was the day that John D. Rockefeller and his company Standard Oil struck a deal with the Pennsylvania Railroad that would cement his monopoly on the nation's oil refineries. In the early 1870s, Rockefeller was building his oil empire out from its center in Cleveland, Ohio. In October of 1877, the nation went through a great upheaval, a popular uprising of 250,000 railroad workers and their allies. The uprising had only ended after a series of bloody skirmishes in rail centers across the country that saw 100 workers killed. The Pennsylvania Railroad had lost $3 million in destroyed property. Recognizing the railroad was in trouble, Rockefeller decided to capitalize on the opportunity. The railroad had just entered into a partnership with one of Rockefeller's competitors, the Empire Transport Company, earlier that year. The strike had weakened both partners. Rockefeller was able to purchase Empire's assets far below their actual value. For example, he purchased an Empire oil refinery in Pennsylvania for $500,000. Within 4 years, that refinery had earned Rockefeller 3 times that amount. But the most important part of the deal was that Rockefeller could ship his oil on the Pennsylvania Railroad so cheaply that he could drive out his remaining competition. Standard Oil was shipped on rail for 8 cents a barrel. Other companies had to pay more than $1.44. By the 1890s, Rockefeller's refineries handled 90% of the nation's oil. His ruthless efforts to drive out competition made Rockefeller increasingly unpopular with the public and the target of anti-monopoly reformers. In addition, Rockefeller and his company became increasingly notorious for their heavy-handed anti-labor practices, most infamously for the Ludlow Massacre of 1914.
I read the news today, oh boy.
It's time for Nicole Sandler's What's News from NicoleSandler.com and the Progressive Voices Network.
Americans awoke Thursday morning to very sad news. Congressman Elijah Cummings passed away overnight. His office said it was due to complications concerning long-standing health challenges. There are a lot of quotes to choose from to play here, but I'll take this one from Chairman Cummings' closing statement at a House Oversight Committee hearing featuring Donald Trump's former personal attorney, Michael Cohen, in which he finally told the truth.
I know that this has been hard. I know that you face a lot. I know that you are worried about your family, but this is a part of your destiny. And hopefully, this portion of your destiny will lead to a better Michael Cohen, a better Donald Trump, a better United States of America, and a better world. And I mean that from the depths of my heart. When we're dancing with the angels, the question will be asked, in 2019, what did we do to make sure we kept our democracy intact? Did we stand on the sidelines and say nothing?
Dance away, Mr. Cummings. Dance away. Wednesday marked the 1,000th day of the Trump administration occupying the White House and running roughshod over the Constitution. And it was certainly momentous. At a White House meeting between the president and congressional leaders, things quickly devolved into what Speaker Nancy Pelosi described as a presidential meltdown.
What we witnessed on the part of the president was a meltdown.
He said that there are communists involved and you guys might like that. When he started calling Speaker Pelosi a third-rate politician.
Which I said, I wish you were a politician, Mr. President.
Pelosi reportedly challenged Trump on Russia's involvement in Syria, saying, quote, "All roads with you lead to Putin." The Democratic leader said that the moment that prompted them to walk out was when Trump called Pelosi a, quote, "third-rate politician" to her face. As they left, Trump shot back, "Goodbye, we'll see you at the polls." Meanwhile, the White House pushed back on the Democrats' version of the meeting, saying Trump was measured, decisive, and that Pelosi had, quote, "no intention of listening." One thing that could have set Trump off was the House vote, an overwhelming vote to condemn Trump's withdrawal of American forces from northern Syria. Final tally was 354 to 60, with even some in leadership, including Kevin McCarthy and Steve Scalise, voting to condemn the president's actions. Meanwhile, on Thursday afternoon, Senators Lindsey Graham and Chris Van Hollen will hold a press conference to announce their bipartisan sanctions legislation against Turkey. But the situation on the ground in Syria grows more dire each day. On Wednesday, the U.S. military said 2 F-15E jet fighters carried out an airstrike to destroy an ammunition storage facility, latrines, tents, and other parts of the Syria headquarters of the American campaign to destroy ISIS after pulling its forces from the base. A spokesman for the U.S.-led coalition said the airstrikes were intended to reduce the facility's military usefulness and came after Turkish-backed forces moved on the facility on Tuesday. And despite the fact that Donald Trump is responsible for this travesty by going along with Erdogan's plans and removing American troops from the region who were protecting the Kurds, Trump seemed to react to the criticisms of his decision by writing a letter to Erdogan dated October 9th. A letter so poorly written, so childish, so petty in tone that media outlets questioned its legitimacy and only reported on it after getting confirmation from the White House press office that indeed it was real. The BBC is reporting that Erdogan put the letter, quote, "in the bin," and on the day the letter was received, Turkey launched its cross-border offensive against Kurdish-led forces. Good work, Trump, making America great again. So now, Vice President Mike Pence is leading a U.S. delegation that includes the Secretary of State, National Security Advisor, and the Special Representative for Syria to Turkey. The aim of the trip was to persuade Erdogan to stop his offensive into the region. The plane landed at around 12:30 local time Thursday in Ankara, and at press time, a picture was just tweeted out of Pence and Erdogan shaking hands. Stay tuned. In other news, the EU and UK have reached a deal on a new withdrawal agreement that'll let Britain depart on orderly terms. This according to the European Commission President Jean-Claude Juncker and UK Prime Minister Boris Johnson. Meanwhile, Joe Swinson, the leader of UK's Liberal Democratic Party, says this is the emperor's new clothes. Back here at home, the impeachment inquiry continues. U.S. Ambassador to the European Union, Gordon Sondland, is scheduled to testify before Congress on Thursday. He's expected to say that he thought the former U.S. Ambassador to Ukraine, Marie Yovanovitch, was, quote, great, and that he has nothing negative to say about her job performance despite her ouster by Trump. He'll also reportedly testify that after he attended the Ukrainian president's inauguration in May, he met with Trump Energy Secretary Rick Perry and former U.S. Special Envoy Kurt Volker in the Oval Office, where, Sondland will say, Trump told them that any in-person meeting between Trump and Zelensky would have to be approved by Rudy Giuliani? And bad news for Sondland, a businessman with no government or diplomatic experience who bought his ambassadorship with $1 million donation to Trump's inaugural committee. He's now the subject of even more controversy, as new reports surfacing Thursday morning tell of his nearly $1 million renovation of his government-provided residence at taxpayer expense in Brussels. Not a good look. Well, on Wednesday, it was Michael McKinley's turn in the hot seat. The former top advisor to Secretary of State Mike Pompeo reportedly told House impeachment investigators that he abruptly resigned last week because of Donald Trump's attacks on the ousted U.S. ambassador to Ukraine and the State Department's unwillingness to protect career diplomats from politically motivated pressure. On the labor front, a tentative deal has been reached that could end the month-long General Motors strike. Details have not been publicly released yet, and it still needs to get the okay from both union leadership and rank-and-file union members before it can take effect. Meanwhile, in Chicago, 25,000 educators are set to go on strike. Thursday's classes have been canceled in the country's third-largest school district. The educators want higher pay, smaller class sizes, and more support staff. And they should get it all. And that's just a bit of what's news for now. I'm Nicole Sandler. If you appreciate these reports and the Nicole Sandler Show, I hope you'll consider making a contribution. My work is 100% listener supported, so I can't do it without your help. Find out more at NicoleSandler.com, and please click on that donate button.
Thank you for accompanying us here to the chef's table at West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. Metro Shrimp and Grits Thursdays, a little bit of jambalaya, a little bit of spice in your life. We always begin, whether from around the world, along the banks of the Rogue River, in the Rogue River Valley of Southern Oregon on the west coast of the continental United States of America, where it is currently 48 degrees Fahrenheit, expecting a high of around 56 to 58, a little cooler than yesterday. Mostly cloudy conditions prevail at the moment, though clouds are lingering, and, mostly cloudy. Of course, they'd be lingering. They are accumulating, is what I am trying to say, and will begin raining, as we had about 1/4 of an inch yesterday and overnight, and expecting something between 1/10 to 1/4 of an inch. And that should be happening in a couple of hours. Winds will pick up out of the southwest at 5 to 10 miles per hour. And then tonight, showers will occur early and then cloudy overnight, a low in the mid-40s. Winds continuing out of the southwest at 5 to 10 miles per hour. And then tomorrow, intervals of clouds and sunshine. And then we'll have some more rain on Saturday and Sunday. Looks like ragweed pollen is rated moderate. The air quality index locally is good at 33 parts per million. And that daytime UV index is in the moderate range at 3. Barometric pressure is falling at 29.93 inches. Visibility is down to 6 miles. And relative humidity is at 90%. Weather from around the world is brought to you by people's personal weather stations that they purchased. These people planted these purchased personal weather stations somewhere on their property, and these people positively live around the world. London is 60 degrees and partly cloudy. Paris is 60 degrees and mostly cloudy. Rome is 75 and sunny. Kiev is 68 and fair. Kabul is 60 degrees and fair. Hong Kong is 75 and fair. Tokyo is 60 degrees and cloudy. Sydney, Australia is 59 and clear. San Francisco, California is 54 degrees and fair. And New York is 55 degrees Fahrenheit and cloudy. And that is weather from around the world, brought to you by people's personal weather stations that they purchased. These people planted these purchased personal weather stations somewhere on their property, and these people positively live around the world. Packham of Reuters brings us this first amuse-bouche here at the chef's table at West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. Metro Shrimp and Grits Thursdays. Australia's National Intelligence Agency said in a report this week that it does not have enough resources to collect intelligence on foreign agents and their efforts to interfere. Australia, a staunch U.S. ally, has been on heightened alert against the threat of homegrown radicals after several, quote, lone wolf, end quote, attacks have occurred in recent years. But the Australian Security Intelligence Organization, the ASIO, said that as it focuses on those threats, intelligence gathering on foreign interference is falling short. With the terrorist threat showing no signs of significantly decreasing, ASIO has limited scope to redirect internal resources to address the increasing gap between demand for our counter-espionage and foreign interference advice and our ability to furnish this assistance. That was from Duncan Lewis, former Director General of the agency, and he said that in the agency's report. Now, Lewis left the ASIO in September, several weeks after the annual report was presented to the government, and the report was published yesterday, Wednesday. Minister for Home Affairs Peter Dutton said the ASIO would get more money and that the staffing would rise to more than 2,000 people.
Je te donne ce mon amour pour la vie entière, la promesse de me trouver à tes genoux. Aussitôt que tu m'appelles, rester toujours fidèle, c'est tout, c'est tout. Je te donne tous mes printemps, mes étés de mer, mes automnes quand les feuilles tombent partout. Si ce n'est pas une bonne affaire, je te donne tous mes hivers, c'est tout.
Sarah Wu and Jesse Pang of Reuters brings us this final amuse-bouche here at the chef's table at West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. Hong Kong's parliament descended into chaos today, with lawmakers dragged out by security guards for heckling leader Carrie Lam as they demanded an inquiry into the brutal attack on a prominent human rights activist ahead of a major rally. The knife and hammer attack on Jimmy Sham, which left him bloody and lying on the street last night, was designed to intimidate protesters and incite violence ahead of Sunday's march, pro-democracy lawmaker Claudia Mo told reporters. This very vicious attack took place practically on the eve of the call for yet another massive protest in Hong Kong on Sunday. We cannot help feeling that this entire thing is part of a plan to shed blood on Hong Kong's peaceful protests, she said. The second day of turmoil in the Legislative Council after Lam was forced to cut short her annual policy speech due to heckling and broadcast it via video instead underscores the political rift in the city, with no end in sight to more than 4 months of anti-government protests. Well, that brings us to the end of our broadcast period for the day, but you do know that Netroots Radio is going to broadcast on, and we're going to meet up tomorrow for Blue Moon Spirits Fridays, because we are all Nighthawks in the Diner of Life. So do stay tuned to Netroots Radio all day and all night for all the breaking news as it breaks, and we'll meet up here tomorrow, right here, in West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. Bon appetit.
Je voudrais du soleil vert, des dentelles et des théières, des photos de bord de mer, dans mon jardin d'hiver. Je voudrais de la lumière, comme en Nouvelle-Angleterre. Je veux changer d'atmosphère, dans mon jardin d'hiver. Ma fleur sous la pluie de novembre, tes mains qui courent, je n'en peux plus de t'attendre. Les années passent, il est loin, là je tombe. Nul ne peut nous entendre. Je voudrais du Fred Astaire, revoir un latte Goël. Je voudrais toujours te plaire, dans mon jardin d'hiver. Je veux déjeuner par terre, comme au long de golfe clair. T'embrasser les yeux ouverts, dans mon jardin d'hiver. Pluie de novembre, tes mains qui courent, je n'en peux plus de t'attendre. Les années passent, il est loin, là je tombe. Nul ne peut nous entendre. Ba-da-da-dum-di-da-dum. 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 Dans mon jardin d'hiver. Ba-da-da-dum-di-da-dum. 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 Dans mon jardin d'hiver. Dans mon jardin d'hiver. Dans mon jardin d'hiver.